We are in a strange season in one way or another, because think about it. When we provided the outlook for the year at AgriView a few weeks ago, we said 2025-26 production year in agriculture will be one of the excellent seasons. We were counting, of course, on the excellent rainfall that we've been receiving across the country since really the season started in October last year, as well as the fact that in the livestock industry, which is an important part of the South African farming economy, the vaccination may gain some momentum this year. But anyone who's been observing these things closely, you'll know that the vaccination hasn't gained as much momentum, and South Africa is still struggling to procure some of the vaccines that we need for cattle in order to vaccinate for foot and mouth disease. And the pictures and the messages that we receive from farmers, and in some that we speak with them and visit some, we know that the challenge is quite immense, and it has large financial burden on a number of farmers. So the situation is very difficult on that. And the only hope that we are having now, and of course even in conversations that we are having with various government authorities in South Africa, it's about the pace that we need to accelerate in terms of the procurement of the vaccines, but also at the same time thinking about the practical strategy of how that vaccination will roll out. We know that in the feedlots and the others, it may be slightly more efficient, but when you are considering folks that are in the rural areas, especially former homelands and the townships and the others, there are some complications there that needs to be resolved. And I think as we are working on the procurement of the vaccines, the strategy to think about the logistics of all of this is the one aspect that we need to be considering. So that's the one part, and I would say still, we are not changing our view as to whether this will be a good year or not. We're still optimistic, but I'm pointing out as one of the key risks that we are looking at this year. But we also know that as it's been raining, and raining excellently in a number of areas, but there's also been two extremes that we are watching. The mid-January, if you look at what has been happening in Limpopo, we got massive floods in parts of Mpumalanga. And in fact, I would say us in South Africa, we are actually at a much more better place than the folks in Mozambique, because those floods have caused immense damage there to an extent that the South African government and the others had to go there and see how much assistance they can actually provide to the country there. But the situation is bad. But if you look at the areas of Mpumalanga, you look at the areas of Limpopo, there's been some damage there. But we are lucky because we hear that in the potato fields, in some areas it rained just after the guys have finished a bit of their harvesting. But we know that if you are in vegetables, this probably is something that will be a bit of a challenge. As to how much the damage and how much difficulty the farmers are facing at that scale, this is something that we will know more as it unfolds. But we know that if you talk to people that are in the fruit industry side, things aren't as bad. So on the basis of that, we're still thinking that, okay, the fruit industry may be fine, and then in the vegetables, maybe there will be a temporary blip. So if you balance those things up, we can say, yes, although the rains have been disastrous for the households and there's been immense pain in some of the communities because of these floods, but overall, there is still a possibility for a nice recovery in those areas. But if you look at the province where I come from, in the Eastern Cape, we've also had the total opposite of what you are seeing there. In the mid and to the northeastern side of the Eastern Cape, we've been receiving excellent rains, and it's looking great as you drive out of the Free State, getting to the Eastern Cape, or drive out of KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, getting in the Eastern Cape. Things are looking nicely good there. We've been receiving excellent rains. But from the central regions of the Eastern Cape, all the way to the Garden Route or southwestern parts of the province, it's been very dry, to an extent that as I sit here and talk about this, we are in February now, but the Garden Route hasn't received as much rain. And the worry now that we have is that, of course, we do get some areas that are winter rains in South Africa. But those winter rains, which we receive from end of April or beginning of May, they're usually for the Western Cape, because it's the Western Cape that is a winter rainfall area. So you have this belt of the central to the southern parts of the Eastern Cape province that are actually very dry at the moment. And of course, that raises a whole range of concerns because there is agricultural activity there. We have citrus that is under irrigation in those areas. We also have dairy farmers that are there and others that are in sheep and all range of the other agricultural activities that are there. So far, much of the coverage that we've been seeing on the news, it's about what is happening in the households, the difficulties that they face, which is an important thing to highlight and think about what interventions can actually be done to assist those areas. But the reality is also that on an agricultural side, this is something that may become a challenge as well if we don't get the rains. And you'll recall when we released here on AgriView the outlook for the year, we talked about the fact that we are in a La Nina weather phenomenon. And now in Southern Africa, when you are in La Nina, it means a possibility of above normal rainfall. And of course, this is why then in the northern region, central parts of South Africa, we've been seeing that above normal rainfall. But the other point that we made was that the La Nina rains were supposed to start from the around beginning of October and possibly run to the end of March. So we're now in February, and we are only hoping that if we can get those rains in the central and all the way to the southwestern parts of the Eastern Cape between now, mid-February, all the way to the end of March, then we may see a bit of a recovery. If we don't, and the La Nina cycle is off, and then we are now nearing to the winter season, that's something that will worry us. Because even if you are in the livestock industry there, I mean, you didn't really receive the excellent rains that will help on making sure that the grazing felt recovers. And the only thing really that is saving a lot of people in those areas is the fact that feed prices in South Africa right now, they are pretty much low. If you look at the maize prices, for example, they are down by roughly 30% from a year ago because of the good harvest that we have had. So you do have affordable feed that will assist to a certain extent, but I think that receiving more rain in that area would help a lot. So this is the contrast that we are having in South Africa, where in the central regions of the country, things are moving slightly well in terms of the rainfall. In the northeastern parts of the country, it's excessive rain and the floods, while if you are looking at the southwestern parts of the country, it's actually dry. And I guess this is some of those dynamics of climate change that we are seeing in here. And I guess someone may ask then and say, if then the weather is giving us all of these difficulties, what did the farmers do? Because one of the points that we had made at AgriView was that the farmers were very optimistic at the start of the season. They talked about how they will possibly plant more area in 2025-26 production season than they had planted a season before. And I'm looking here at the numbers, for example, that were released by the Crop Estimate Committee at the end of January 2026. And what they told us was that for the summer grains and the oilseeds, the farmers likely planted about 4.5 million hectares. And then when you look at this area and you compare with what was planted in the 2024-25 production season, this is up by 2% from that. Now, considering then that there's an increase in the area planting, and if also then we get these excellent rains, and it rains perhaps maybe until the end of March, I think that those of us that are optimistic that it can be another season of an abundant harvest would probably not off the mark that much, because the numbers are pointing really to a favorable season. I know it's still early, and we will at the end of February receive the first production estimates from the Crop Estimate Committee, which will give us a guidance about how much yield is that. But I think what's important to highlight is the fact that if you look then at that number, which is this 4.5 million hectares of land, that encompasses all of the grains and the oilseeds in that. And then if you ask about, are all of the grains and the oilseeds area increasing, or are we seeing a decline in some of the other areas? What I will say is that if you look into this, you'll realize that maize, for example, the area that we have now is 2.67 million hectares. That is up 3% from the previous season. For soybeans, we are seeing also a decent area of around 1.1 million hectares. That is up 3% from the previous season. And of course, we see an increase of a 1% also on sunflower seeds. But all of the other small grains, there's a decline on that. If you're thinking about sorghum, you're thinking about dry beans, we see a decline in that area. But overall, putting all of this together, it's pointing to the right direction. I think it's really a shift in the area plantings based on what the farmers were seeing in terms of profitability, which is why the numbers look in this way. But overall, it's really a season that is pointing to the upside. But that's what we're seeing in terms of the grains and the oilseeds production. But if you talk to people that are in the sugarcane production in parts of Mpumalanga and parts of KZN, these good rains, they have assisted there as well. And I think that the harvest that will come up from our folks at the sugarcane side will also be pointing to a bit of an increase. Because remember, even in the 2024-25 season, the sugarcane production was up, benefiting from these La Nina rains. And I think this time around they will benefit because, again, we're not really having all of our sugarcane under irrigation. It's really a small part that is under irrigation, about 20% or so. The majority of it is rain-fed. So when we get the good rain in the eastern regions of South Africa, that helps in terms of the output in the sugarcane production. And I think this also then benefits even on a grazing felt. But of course, you can't really make a statement and say, okay, great rains, great improvement in grazing felt, therefore the outlook is good for the cattle farmers and the others. No, because of the very same point that I started with of saying the foot and mouth disease is giving us a lot of difficulty for the folks that are in the livestock, particularly cattle farmers. And of course, those that are in goats or sheep, we are still fine there. And we are exporting our wool and the other products to other markets. But what is important now is ensure that as much of a challenge as the foot and mouth disease is, we continue to strengthen our biosecurity controls so that we don't have a risk of these diseases now starting to affect all of the other stock. Because in challenges like that, it could be catastrophic. Because I mean, think about it. In the wool industry in South Africa, 70% of our wool goes to China. And if you were to be blocked in that market, then that would be disastrous for the Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, and parts of the Free State. So there are all of those risks that we are looking at. But I think the way that will take us out of this is really gearing up and accelerating the vaccination. And that depends on a vaccine being available, as well as making sure that we have a clear logistical plan of rolling it out when the vaccines are available. And of course, it will need cooperation of farmers, and farmers do need and want to actually begin to vaccinate, but also the community leaders and the others. As we speak about all of this in AgriView, I do want to stress the fact that for consumers and the others, there's really no risks about what is happening in here. You are safe to consume your dairy. It is safe to consume your meat and all of the other products and support the South African farmers in all of this process. And of course, in terms of inflation, we still maintain a view that we are potentially looking at a moderating food price inflation because of the ample harvest that we will be receiving on grains and fruits and the other products. And with that, folks, I thought it would be important to revisit this, given all of these contrasting things on weather, the headlines that we are seeing about foot and mouth disease, as well as these statistics that we are receiving about the area plantings. And I thought that in this week at AgriView, we must make sure that we revisit all of those points. And as always, we deliver these insights in part because we want to ensure that you are informed about what's going on in agriculture, but also through the support that we receive from our friends at Nedbank, who make sure that we are able to record and deliver this segment to you. If you are watching us for the first time, please subscribe on the link below. We drop new episodes every Thursday. Thanks for watching.